Hello and welcome back to the Pet Business Wellbeing Podcast with me, Nathan Dunleavy. This is the podcast where we talk about the realities of running a pet business, the highs, the challenges, and most importantly, how to look after your well-being whilst you do it. Because running a business should support your life, not consume it. Andrew Hale, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, Nathan. Well, good to see you. So I always love sharing any kind of space with you, really. So thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're most welcome. I love chatting and spending time with you. So thank you so much for coming on. So for those listeners or viewers at some stage that may not know you, I don't know how, but if they haven't heard of you before, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do?
So I'm a dog behaviourist working here in the UK. I'm a behavioural consultant with Pet Remedy. I'm an expert advisor with Canine Arthritis Management. I'm also a consultant for the British Isles Grooming Association. And that's my kind of bread and butter, really. I run the Dog Centre Care Group. My previous kind of work was in human therapy. I've got a human psychology background. And now moving forward, I'm kind of bringing these two things together, really looking at the important thing about emotional well-being, actually, but especially for us working in the animal care profession, because it's...
Yeah, no, I love that. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I'm glad you mentioned that because we are going to be talking about emotional well-being today. And I love that the angle that you're now moving in, the direction you're moving in, helping pet pros, well, animal care pros, vet pros as well. So you work with many pet professionals, vet professionals, animal care professionals who are capable and caring and passionate people about what they do, but yet they're often quite emotionally exhausted behind the scenes. So to start us off, could you share what emotional well-being actually means in the context of being a pet professional and why it's something that we really need to start talking more openly about in this industry, please, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. So I think emotional well-being is important, period, regardless of what you do. And understanding that. So a big part of emotional well-being is the element of awareness, having some awareness of our own needs, understanding the importance and roles of self-care, having the opportunities to be able to feel anything that we have to feel, and to understand healthy relationships with those feelings, and having the opportunities to be able to deal with them as they come along and not collect them as we move forwards, which is something we can easily do. We just build these things. And so emotional well-being is very important. A lot of it, as I say, is that awareness. The principle of emotional well-being is relatively new, and as far as we talk about mental health a lot.
We do, yeah.
And mental health and emotional health are very connected, of course. Emotional well-being is looking at us as the whole, really. It's not just about how we think, it's also about how we feel and how validated we feel in those feelings, especially when we look at who we see in the mirror, when we consider self-worth and how we value ourselves and how we value our own emotional responses and how we protect them. So that's just a human thing that we all need to be more aware of, I think. We can unpack that in a moment. I think within the animal care profession, there is an extra level, which is the fact that many of us, whether we're a trainer, a behaviourist, dog walker, vet nurse, part of why we do what we do is because of our attraction to want to be involved with and help another species, which we can see as being vulnerable, the dog, the cat, the horse, or whatever. And we often get into this kind of area because that's where our passion lies. Our passion to want to work with animals. So we can easily kind of get on that kind of runaway train of learning our craft, learning our profession, start working with the public. And it can happen quite quickly, and it's a big build up. And then suddenly we're involved in this very challenging job, which has many different layers to it, without having thought of our own self in that process.
Yeah.
So that
definitely
kind of answers that question, I think, about why many people struggle, because, I love dogs, I love dogs, and I love training. So now I've learned to be a trainer. That's great. Then before you know, oh my God, you're running a business, you might have staff, you've got to look after your tax. This is where your side of things is so important, Nathan, because understanding that the business, we can work the business doesn't have to work us. That's really important. And we just get pulled into this kind of thing, and our own needs are often unmet. Now, We're going to talk about boundaries today, I think, because they're a very important part of well-being. But
Yeah.
an important boundary, there's two very important boundaries I think we can look at today. But the first is where we finish and somebody else starts. That includes our
Mm,
client. And
mm,
not enough thought goes into the type of relationship we want to make with our client. We just
mm.
we just we just go into it, you know. So we can look at that in a second. And the second boundary is where our everyday life finishes and our business life starts. So
Yeah.
often we end up having this blurry enmeshment that is actually quite overwhelming and not sustainable.
Mm, yeah, definitely. It's really interesting because obviously a lot of people get into working with animals because they love animals. They love working with dogs or any type of animal, but then they don't realize obviously there's the human element of it as well, isn't there? So you may be like fantastic with animals, but you have to have a level of communication to be able to deal with the human as well. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, do they?
No, and actually that's a really good point. Back in the day, I'm talking dog training now, which is my area. Or
Yeah.
a lot of people came in because they love dogs, but they didn't like people much, and you could probably get
Yeah.
away with it. But there, so on that kind of level, there is that, which is I love. Just to keep it simple, I'll just talk about being a dog trainer, for example,
That's
or
it.
a dog behaviourist. I love dogs. I'm really passionate about looking after them, especially if you're on the progressive side of things, and you really want to make sure that the dog is being looked after well and has a voice and all these kind of things. But of course, they're not your animal. So in order to kind of really help, we have to get on with the caregiver.
Yeah.
And there's two really important things at play here. The first is why do we do the work we do?
Mm.
And it's a really important question. And on the surface, it's like, well, I love dogs, but why? But I like the kind of mechanics of dog training, yeah, but why? And when we drill down on it, for
Mm.
many of us within the animal care sector,
Yeah.
that motivation is forged in our own past, our own traumas,
Mm.
our own insecure attachments. Often we found our first secure attachment with an animal. And that's what I call our activism, that bit that creates that fire in our belly that we think,
Mm.
God, you know what? I really want to make sure that dogs are looked after well and that people understand them and that they don't have any more suffering than they need to have and all these kind of things. But
Mm.
that's our activism. Now, the issue there is that's great, but we have problems if we bring that activism into those relationships with our client, because this is the
Mm.
second half of that. We've turned up to help and support or offer our services to somebody else. This is why we
Mm.
talked about at the beginning of the chat about how important it is to set up those relationships well in the first place and understand what they are,
Mm.
because the person we're working with, they've got their own story and their own challenges and their own upbringing and their own conditioning and their own view of things. And if we're not careful, we end up crossing a very important boundary before we even start. And that is
Mm.
projecting our needs, our expectations, and our values onto somebody else
Mm.
within that what is supposed to be a working relationship.
Yeah.
So this is why it gets a little bit more complex. And I think one of the things we have to do as animal care professionals as part of emotional well-being is have the opportunity to have a consideration of our own story a little bit and just think, actually, so for myself, I know that through part of my own trauma and my own kind of survival story, if you like, we all have a survival story, because if we're living today, we've survived another day, and that's not always an easy process. And if you're caring and if you're compassionate and if you're empathetic, we're not just like that. It often comes from our life challenges that because they can become almost coping mechanisms. Actually, I don't want this to happen to somebody else, so I want to help others.
Mm.
Or quite often, that empathy we have is forged out of our need to be hyper vigilant as a child. So we're
Mm.
very aware of the emotions of others and how important it is to try and somehow support those for our own safety.
Mm.
So understanding these components are very important. So for me, then, I've got a little bit of what we call blue light syndrome, which is where I know I have the capacity to stick my blue lights on and go and save.
Yes. Okay. I love that
Yeah.
analogy. Yeah.
And this is where we come into a notion, Nathan, of unbounded empathy. This
Right.
notion of unbounded empathy, which is very common again in animal care. And if we're not careful, if you think about it, the dynamics of what we do, we're running a business for a start. We're not running a
Mhm.
charity. We're not, we're running a business. So, and what is that business about? What am I here to do? So I'm a dog behaviorist. What am I here to do? Well, I can't manipulate and manage outcomes because they're not my dogs. Uh, and short of me taking the dog and having it live with me, I have to influence the caregiver as to how they perceive their dog, what they perceive their dog's care and support needs. That's how I need to work with.
Mhm.
So I have to make sure that I care and I want to help,
Mhm.
but I have to make sure that those boundaries are in place regarding what that relationship actually is. Otherwise, we
Mhm.
fall into unbounded empathy, and this is where we can go from caring into carrying. A lot of
Right.
healthcare professionals do way more.
Mm.
In their mind, they think it's, well, because I'm kind and I want to help, and but sometimes it's because they don't want to be seen to not care.
Okay, yeah.
They don't like saying no, for example. So if you're very susceptible to social rejection, you will find some boundaries hard to apply. So
Okay.
caring can turn into carrying, and then supporting can turn into saving. Now that's my little demon on my shoulder because
Oh,
I
okay.
can easily fall into that.
Yes, I can
Um,
imagine.
and even within our kind of loving relationships with family and close friends, we might fall into that, but even then, it's not necessarily healthy too.
Mm.
But within a professional relationship with a client, if we haven't pre-described in our head what that relationship is from the start and have the proper boundaries in place, we can fall into these things. So guess what? We can't save and we can't carry the burden of others. So it's no wonder that we buckle under it with burnout and
Yeah.
compassion fatigue and these other things.
Yeah. No, that's great. And just picking up on a couple of threads on some things you've mentioned. So you said, well, I mean, yeah, we get into this because we want to be a dog trainer, behaviorist. We want to work with animals or dogs. We then have to obviously have a relationship with the human because it's the human paying the bill at the end of the day, not the animal. But then we're also running businesses. So there's all these different hats, isn't there? So you may be the best dog behaviorist, but you may not be very good at running a business. But that's okay because that's where you can get support from business coaches and business mentors and things like that. But I don't think people realize the extent of what's involved because there's just so much dealing with the human, the animal, and running a business. It's a lot to juggle, isn't it?
But it's a huge amount. And even just running the business side of stuff, none of us most of us didn't go to kind of school to learn how to run a business or be a business person and understand tax and all these kind of things. And it can feel very overwhelmed, very overwhelming very quickly. So there are enough challenges anyway without us adding to them by not being aware of our own emotional standing,
Mm.
which is what this is about, really. This is the whole thing about understanding our own care needs and what we need to do. And some of it is challenging, Nathan, because we need a level of awareness. We call it having a healthy professional presence. So we all have a
Mm.
professional presence just by being
Yeah.
professional. But if you
Yeah.
look that up from a psychological point of view, there's a lot of different strands to that about having a healthy professional presence. That bit
Mm.
of you that you think, right, this is me, Andy Hale, dog behaviorist. I know my relationship with my clients. I've had the right boundaries in place. And regardless of how other people view that, I see
Mm.
value in the process and I
Mm-hmm.
will protect myself so I can do this sustainably for X amount of years. Because that for me is a big part of running a successful business. Too
Mm-hmm.
much emphasis is on how much money you earn, how big a profile you have. Those things are great. But if it's not sustainable emotionally for you, then it's not going to be successful because you will burn out or you will suffer from it or your home life will suffer from it. Because if you don't know where your business self ends, as I say, and your normal self, your everyday self starts, that will affect your relationship with family members and friends and everything else. So all this stuff's
Yeah.
very important. I do a kind of a mentoring stroke counseling service for
You
professionals
do.
on this
Yeah.
basis, just to give that space to talk about some of their own bits of their story and
Yeah.
understand the bits that are relevant within a professional setting. Some people need more than that because some of us have had quite deep rooted things in our past that keep tripping us up. So going into
Mm.
some form of therapy can help. But for the majority of people, just stepping back and giving themselves almost like an emotional audit. We talk about
Yeah,
doing a business audit, but
I
about doing
love
it
that.
emotionally. Yeah, and just checking in with some stuff and thinking that this bit
Yeah.
isn't working for me, and being humble enough to recognize and give ourselves grace to recognize that this need to be productive, this need to be, whatever is maybe being driven by something else, is necessarily because I want my business to succeed.
Yeah. And I love that you've touched on that, because that's your safe space with Andrew Hale, which is like your mentoring and emotional support offering. And I know you've helped loads of amazing pet professionals recently, myself included. So I've been through your program, and I love obviously having time with you, and your wisdom. And I will put all the links to that in the show notes. So yeah, I'm glad that you what just actually, why did you suddenly decide maybe to start offering that? Did you just see that there was this wider issue with animal care professionals that needed that additional support?
But yes, it's been pretty apparent for a long time. It's not a new thing though. So even
Right.
8 or 9 years ago, when but even more 10, well, it's over 10 years ago, actually thinking about it. Where's time? Anyway, when I was a student with the ISCP,
Right.
I offered my support there to fellow students. So
Yes.
we did a free student support service, and that went a bit nuts. There's loads of people coming forwards. When I was the chair into dogs, so we set up a emotional health support service for accredited behaviourists and trainers. So there's been a theme there all along.
Yeah.
Because of my own health challenges I had a year or two ago, which means that I can't do so much in-person dog behaviour work, it just gave me a chance to think, well, maybe I need to put something together here. So I did it for about 12 months without doing it, if you know what I mean.
That's
Just
right.
making a
Yeah.
note. And then for the last 12 months, I've done it a little bit more structured. As soon as I
Yeah.
mentioned it, again, it went nuts, because people need a space, I feel, as a professional often, just to kind of, the analogy I take is bringing boxes down from the loft. As we go through life, we package stuff up and we stick it in the loft like we do. God, if you saw our
We
loft.
do.
So sometimes it's nice just to bring a box down from the loft and just see what's there, and think,
Yeah.
well, actually that, and often it's the same thing, but affecting us differently. Sometimes our own challenges in life, our own insecure attachments with caregivers, maybe, or our experiences at school, or, or our own kind of, when we've had traumatic events or whatever. Often out of that comes the thing that gives us the fire to do what we do, but it's also the thing that can trip us up. And that's why we have to examine it. And just the main thing for me is looking at our own story with love and understanding, and not looking at it as a way of trying to change ourselves, just understand ourselves and think, right, now I can recognize that maybe that event or that series of events or that relationship in the past might affect how I respond to something today. And a common theme with animal care professionals, there's quite a few actually. So I've probably supported over the last couple of years over 100 people. And there are common themes always that are there. And quite often we develop a big challenge is that we bring that activism into our relationships with our clients.
Yeah.
So if the client is listening to us, doing as we ask them, and the outcome is great, then we feel good about ourselves. If it's not, we don't. Somebody said to me recently, they only feel as good as their last client. So that tells me already that we're not turning up in an emotionally healthy way, because our sense of worth is too predetermined by the value of others. So we have to understand why we're doing what we're doing. What's our purpose? The purpose for us, and cut through the chaff a little bit. So, in the back of my mind, of course, I want to go and help these dogs. I specialize in aggression, and I want to help these dogs live a less stressful life and everything else, and get the caregivers to understand that, all these kind of things. But that's can't be my purpose as a first point, because I can't guarantee that, because there's too many variables. So my purpose actually, for me, is this notion of supported awareness, that I'm here to support the awareness of the caregiver as to their dog's care and support needs.
Yeah.
And I care and I want to help. So that has a huge amount of value right there. We put way too much value on outcomes. Outcomes are important, but we must also put the value in what we offer as a professional as part of that process. And understanding that, so I care and I want to help and I will support you and I will do everything I can to support this process with you, and I'll be available and I'll be there. There is value in that. I see the value in it. Some people might not.
Yeah.
And we have to get ourselves to a point of being that kind of healthy professional presence where we think, I know I'm here. I call it the gift. The gift being, I care and I want to help if you'll let me.
Yeah.
And I'm not your enemy and I'm here to support you. And some people
Yeah.
take that gift, Nathan, some people don't. Some people don't see the value in what you do, or more often they wanted something else. And when we work, for the dog trainers listening in now, you work with somebody and then they go off the radar a bit and you find out they've gone to that aversive trainer down the road. It makes you feel naff, and it does make us feel naff. And we should feel sad for that. But often all that tells us is they found the answer that they were looking for. That doesn't devalue what you were offering. And we can get too focused on that person, not see the other 10 over there that have completely got it bought into what we do and really value that process.
Yeah. No, it's great that you're offering that service. It's really needed. And just to see the initial uptake, like on your post, it went wild, and you helped me as well. And basically in our sessions as well, you said to me, what you're doing with your business mentoring for dog walkers, I feel like you need to open it up to all pet professionals because they need this kind of support, but going in from a well-being angle. So you kind of encouraged me and sort of set me on my way to say, right, I think you should do this. And then my business mentor has evolved into like the Pet Business Wellbeing Mentor podcast and other bits. So it's so needed in our industry.
But yeah, I think we all have to find a way. That there's two important things. One is having an element of self-determination. And a lot of people actually, that is something that comes from having your business that you might not realize actually. And especially I work with, we have predominantly females in my area. And many times these are wonderfully strong women who have played other performative roles. So they've been mom, they've been wife, they've been whatever they need to be in that performative sense. And then they've found their self-determination through doing something which is about them. It's not about them having to kind of fulfill roles for others. And that's the strong element that I find with a lot of the ladies that I mentor, that they've already had an element of self-determination without even realizing that they're determining their own. And there's so many aspects, running a business is bloody hard. We talk about that. So let's grasp the bits that are good then. We can actually manage our time how we want to. We can do it how we want to. We don't have to think, my clients just WhatsApp me, so I must jump on a call with them now. We can fall into that very easily. And again, that's that unbounded empathy again,
Yeah.
The support process then for me as a mentor, same with you, what you do with your mentees, is supporting them to self-actualization. Because that's the next step. It's actualizing for them, seeing their own worth, seeing their potential, and allowing them to be them. When you get to that point, and you kind of come out the other end, and it's quite a messy process sometimes, and it's quite a struggle because we're weighed down by the narratives of others and our own past experiences and our poor sense of worth. Remember, worth never changes. We're always enough. The thing that changes is value, how we value that. And if you think about two important things for us as human beings, first of all, as soon as our nervous system hits the world, we're changed by it. The world keeps changing us based on our nervous system's response to it. And the second thing is, most of what we believe, we have no evidence for other than somebody's told us. So when you're a little toddler, just kind of, doing what you're doing, and you're feeling this thing and it's kind of hard and you can kind of climb on it and then you get a splintery thing and that's a bit ouch. But then one day somebody says, that's a chair. Oh, it's a chair, right. I didn't know it's a chair, but you've told me it is. And then, this feels a bit squishy underfoot and it's a bit cold and it's a bit damp. Oh, that's grass because you've told me that's grass, right? And grass is green. Okay, great. And that's the sky and it's blue. Do you see what I'm saying? So we get fed this information, we get told these things. But we also get told this stuff about ourselves. Or being silly. You're a bad girl. You're a bad boy. Why do that? Because you're not very good at it, or this isn't, or whatever it is that keep coming into our mind. We take that information on too.
Yeah.
So at some point we have to go through a process and you can do it yourself. Sometimes it's better to be helped by a mentor or whatever, to kind of find that within yourself where you think, oh, do you know what? It can only be me.
Yeah.
I give myself grace. I am humble about my light and my shade, and I know that in my professional sense that I come with good tidings in that space and goodwill.
Yeah.
And it's a relief then, because you don't feel you have to get external validation for it.
Mhm.
You don't need somebody else to decide whether you're any good or not. You
Yeah.
just you see value in what you do. So that's that
Yeah.
self-actualization that's very important.
Yeah. Brilliant. If I may, so obviously we get into this line of work and working with animals, and obviously then there's the extension of working with the humans. But I think as pet professionals, we are empaths. I know I'm an empath, I'm empathetic, and I care too much. And I think we get into it because we really, really care. But then that's when, because we care too much, you then see burnout, struggle with boundaries, and compassion fatigue. Do you think that is there a link, like, to caring too much or giving away yourself too much, and then all that other noise comes in?
Definitely link between all those things. But I would invite you and listeners to not worry about the too much.
Okay.
We care. Okay, great. But we have to, this is that unbounded empathy again. We have to recognize what that care means. Because, okay, so we want to offer care and support. I think most animal care professionals will see that as underpinning things. But we have to examine what care and support means. Care for what? And
Okay.
often when we fall into this thing about caring into carrying, supporting into saving, it's actually, a lot of it is about our own needs, not the other person's. And that's a challenging thing to think about sometimes, because they think, well, but I care. What are we caring? We're caring about how we might be perceived if we don't show up, if we don't
Mhm.
do that thing, if we happen to say no.
Mm.
So we also, if we care, the person we want to care too much for, which we could never do, is ourselves. That's why the self-care bit's important. I talk about
Yes.
care-centered working, and I'm going to be launching a course on this soon,
Lovely.
because care-centered working is something that I'm kind of pulling over from the human care sector, and we need to think about it care-centered. So animal-centered, sure. So that's care for the animal, care for the caregiver, and care for ourselves. And we have to understand those three dynamics and how we turn up as a professional. I can tell people now, if you're a dog trainer, for example, who before you know it, you're decorating your client's room and doing their shopping for them, that is not about caring too much. That is about you and your own personal story and lack of boundaries within those professional relationships. Now, it's a wonderful thing. It's great, isn't it? You say, oh, yeah, okay, well, don't worry. So I've got a day off tomorrow. I'll come around and help you. That's all wonderful. But at
Yes.
some point, we have to step back and think, is this sustainable? Because
Mm.
if we're superhuman and we just keep doing it and it's all great and we take joy from it all the time, then that's great. If that's who you are, not anybody like
Yeah.
that, but if that's who they are. But if you're somebody who goes through falling into compassion fatigue, a big sign of compassion fatigue is that we're lacking self-compassion first. So we talk about, which is a big part of self-care, and we also need to think about self-empathy, which we don't talk about enough. You
Mm.
might tell me, Andy, I don't know, when I was in this situation, I did this thing and I feel really bad about it. I feel really terrible about it. I hope you won't judge me. And if I'm saying to you, no, I totally get it. I hear you, no judgment here. If I can't have that same conversation with myself, then I need that self-empathy for myself and think, do you know what? That wasn't your best day. You could have done things differently, but I understand that you were struggling. This is that thing about being aware of our own emotional load. So self-compassion, we can be compassionate all day, every day, if we come from a well-regulated and supported place.
Yeah.
When we're starting to feel tired, overwhelmed, overloaded, when we're starting to feel stressed, when we're starting to lose our primary social kind of connections because we're getting too involved in work, guess what? We have less. We start to resent. We start to listen to that person on the phone and think, bloody hell, not another one. It's that kind of feeling. When you start feeling that, you're already not getting that balance right. And it's
Yeah.
the same with burnout. if you're doing all these extra things and because you feel that you're that kind of person
Mm.
and you're experiencing the burnout, or somebody says something to you, rather than be thankful, they don't reply to a message, or they don't say thank you, or you ask something of them and they don't reply and then feel bad about it. Again, it's about us. Because if you're doing something for everybody all the time because you have that unbounded element to you, and then you want something back and it doesn't come, well, we've invested in that relationship in the first place of me giving, me giving, me giving.
Mm.
So 9 times out of 10, that sense of caring too much, I think we just need to talk about, well, I care. And the too much bit often comes from our own story and our own needs to be seen, our own needs to be validated, our own needs to be connected. And that in itself isn't a problem. Nothing's a problem, Nathan. It's just an understanding. Well, so where's that come from then? Where's that come from? And how helpful is that within a professional relationship? That's the point we're looking at through this lens. You know, we all have complicated relationships with our loved ones. God, I totally could keep Jeremy Cole going for a whole season, but within professional things, it doesn't have to be this. And it's another gift we can give ourselves, being self-employed especially, is we can decide upon what that professional relationship looks like. And if we've done a bit of the work on ourselves first, we can turn up a bit more healthy. So I don't blue light in my professional setting. So I say I have that in me too, but I have the right boundaries in place and the right mental connection to my professional relationships to try and make sure that sometimes it might happen, and it has happened rarely, but because it's every so often, I can check myself and think, okay, I'm doing it here. But it's also not happening with every single client because I just burn out again.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Yeah, you're really good actually in terms of your boundaries and stuff, which is great. So I don't know if I've spoken to you about this before, but I have mentioned it on podcasts. But obviously my background was in corporate banking. So I had a very successful corporate career in corporate and business banking with Barclays Bank. And then I set up my dog walking business, and then I retrained as a dog trainer, and then I looked to specialize in separation anxiety and blah blah blah. But in all of my corporate career, I had never suffered or experienced imposter syndrome until I became a dog trainer. And I think to this day now, it may be a little bit of the reason why I don't really do a lot of dog training anymore. I do it for my existing clients, but I don't actually promote it. And it's made me just like think like I had this really stressful, successful career in the bank, but then I became a dog trainer and I suddenly had this feeling of imposter syndrome. It just came from nowhere.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is a very big topic, actually. And the more, if you look at some of the latest kind of psychological thought process around it, it's very nuanced, and it's a label we grab very quickly. It was first kind of coined back in the 70s with someone who was looking at females within the workplace who are very, you're in high-powered jobs who still didn't feel they were good enough. And a lot of that was to do with the kind of patriarchal system within banking and the things. What I would say is this: when I speak to my mentees about it, often it isn't imposter syndrome in a traditional sense that we might think it.
Mm.
I don't know enough about you, how you feel, so I'm not saying it isn't that. But often it comes down to conflicting narratives in the mind.
Mm.
And for dog trainers I work and behaviourists I work with, it's because the structure and process within which they're working isn't supporting how they want to work and how they want to operate. So, for example, we might know, especially the people who are working in a very dog-centric way, it's not a quick fix. I'm not here to fix. But part of their back brain is saying, oh, but I feel under pressure to be seen to fix.
Mm.
So now already we're starting to doubt what we do. We're putting way too much emphasis on outcomes. And as I say, if that turns out great, that's great. If it doesn't, we feel it not good enough. It could be in your story, Nathan, I don't know, that when you were within the banking sector, it had that structure. You had a
It
process.
did.
You
That's
had
the
people
thing.
that you were answerable to and people that were answerable to you. And you had
Yes,
very specific set markers about performance.
that's right. Yes.
So somebody else is already deciding on those measures of worth, if you like, measures of value.
Mm.
When we work
Mm.
for ourselves, this is why we have to have a healthy mindset, because people who've heard me talk before have heard me talk about Bob. I know we spoke
Yeah,
about Bob
we've
before,
spoke about
but
Bob.
So we've got a part of our brain which is, it's been through us to all our challenges and our trauma, and listen to all these mixed narratives, and is very defensive, wants to keep us safe, often paranoid, very emotional, very shoot first, ask questions later. All the stuff we see on social media is people's Bobs shouting at each other. I just happen to call mine Bob, but you
I
can
love
call
it.
yours whatever you want. A great book on this is The Chimp Paradox.
Yes.
Looking at our inner chimp, But Bob, we have to find a space to understand Bob, break bread with Bob, come to peace with Bob. Because often Bob is the voice that is quite destructive, that feeds the imposter syndrome. And often it comes from the fact that we're not turning up with building a healthy relationship with our client from the start, understanding why we're there, setting those boundaries clearly in place, setting our own notion of what that successful process looks like, which isn't always about outcome. The more we work on that, the more we feel good in what we do, but if we don't have any of those things, and I would say the majority of professionals don't, because we don't talk about that side of stuff.
Yeah.
Without getting the structure right and the process right, then we are at the whim and the mercy of events.
Yeah.
And if you get a few challenging clients that are challenging, not because of your skill set, because of your mechanics, but just because of the fact that they are challenging sets of dogs, if you haven't got a healthy mindset about that, which is, my dear friend Sarah Fisher passed away recently, but her big thing was about staying curious. So it's like, right, do I have a mindset which thinks, rather than thinking, oh my God, I'm no good at this because we're not getting X, Y, and Z, thinking, right, what's happening here? Let's stay curious. I'm here to help, and I care, and I want to help, and things are challenging. Let's look at it. Okay, let's just sit down and think about it. And this is where counseling skills comes in, and advanced communication skills, to help us have that relationship where we're working forward with the client, rather than taking the burden of those kind of problems and challenges on our shoulders, because that just feeds into imposter again. That's the kind of thing. I can't do it. What it is we can't be the professional we're trying to be, which isn't authentic, actually. This notion that we can be seen to be, everybody loves us, every case becomes a success because everybody's happy, it's just not realistic. One last thing on this. With your banking career, you went through structured education with that. You had proper points of entry with the bank, nationally recognized kind of education and awards. We can't even agree on what's the best educator or school. Oh, you went to that school, that's not as good as my school. So we've got to work on ourselves. I think I need to turn up as healthy as I can. I'm going to have those niggles. The point is this: Bob is there. So when things go wrong, Bob's still there. Still makes me feel crap. Still makes me have a day where I think, oh, can I do this? But we can build those skills to think, right, that's just Bob. Let's just look at the realities of it. Let's think about how we grow. Let's stay curious, as wonderful Sarah used to say. That's just a helpful mindset. There's nothing we can do. Think about emotional health. It's exactly the same as physical health. You can, not that this is the, but you could go to the gym, you could eat healthily, you could be as fit as a fiddle. It doesn't mean you're It doesn't mean you're not going to fall over and sprain your ankle. You can be you can get as many ducks in a row as possibly and have work at your emotional health. I have to. I had a breakdown in my early 30s, a big one as well. So I have to work on my emotional health. I have to find ways for me that allow me to keep turning up in a sustainable way. But it doesn't mean that you don't have a wobble. It doesn't mean when people are unkind, it doesn't hurt. But it's how we respond that tells us whether we have a healthy professional presence and a healthy emotional state or not. That's the measure, really. And that's why it's important to have supportive networks, because it's hard on your own, and this is why it's wonderful what you do with your Pet Business Wellbeing mentorship and the groups that you support, because, my thing's called Safe Space. I call it your safe space. And I did that for two reasons. One is because I wanted it to be a safe space, but also I understand that I'm not a safe space for everybody. Or if I'm not your safe space, then don't come to me then. That's the point. And that's my way of saying I'm not for everybody, and that's fine. We have to see value in our own worth. I sent you a certificate like I do with my other colleagues and shared it out. And that's just to remind us that our worth doesn't decrease based on somebody else's lack of value of it. So we have to do the work.
Yeah. Brilliant. I love how you sort of looked at that from the whole structure of the bank and all the, the layers. And then I've come into running a business, and it's not as structure. That's a really good comparison. And yeah, it's just remembering your dear friend and our amazing colleague, Sarah Fisher, bless her heart. Um, Andrew, I just, before we wrap up, I just want to touch and finish on just our vet professional colleagues. As you know, I've been speaking to a vet physio professional recently. There's a big group of them. There's vet nurses, there's canine massage therapists, chiropractors, acupuncturists. There's loads of them. And she just said there's like 90 of them, and like they're just all struggling with mental health and burnout and imposter syndrome. Just, do you think that's because of like there's another layer they're dealing with, like dogs that are elderly or maybe end of life, and then they've got that emotional aspect that they're dealing with the dog and the what comes out with the humans? Is that why our vet friends and colleagues are struggling more?
You know, I think it's a very there's definitely an emotional health crisis within veterinary. Like yourself, I do a lot of work with veterinary colleagues, and there is so many layers. The veterinary profession has changed so much, both with the advent of corporate kind of buyouts, the lack of opportunities for younger vets to think, well, I might be a partner one day. The fact that we understand more and more about the kind of lived physical experience of animals underneath their medical conditions. So there's a lot of pressure to kind of do a lot of stuff for the vet in a very short amount of time. You know, a lot of what the kind of traditional ways of doing veterinary practice is not really fit for purpose. That's not my view. That's what vets are telling me. And then there isn't enough emphasis. I spoke at the Head Vet Nurse Congress last year, talking
Yes.
about creating emotionally healthy cultures within practices. We need more emphasis on that. I think the governing bodies need to step up more. I think we need to have more opportunities for people to talk about things. Everything we've talked about in this podcast today about why are you a vet? What are you bringing into that space? What are you bringing into that consult? How much support are you getting to be able to detach your professional presence from your everyday stuff? Because our everyday stuff is a work in progress. But quite often, like with many animal care professionals, a lot of those things get brought into that space. I think the notion of resilience, I really hate the term resilience. You heard me talk about it at ABK last year. But I think it's a stick that's often used to hit a lot of veterinary professionals with. You know, you need to be more resilient, you know. And even the term professional, Nathan, is another stick that gets hit with people. And you've got to be professional, which means don't be emotional, don't wear heart on sleeves, you know. It's okay. And this is the problem when we think about creating emotionally safe cultures. Saying to people, don't get involved, don't get attached, you know, you're here to do a job, don't get too emotional, kind of, you know, even if it's the fourth PTS you've had that day, somehow shrug it off and go in the next day. The problem is people will feel those things, but now they feel they can't talk about them. So that is now an emotionally unsafe working environment. So there's so many things. Sorry, but you just triggered something in me there, because I just really feel
sorry.
veterinary colleagues. No, not in a bad way. We could spend a whole hour on it.
We could.
One of the roles I do with canine arthritis management is look at this stuff. And the wonderful Dr. Andrew Hale and I did a presentation last year at the CAM symposium. And the response went crazy because a lot of this stuff is taboo stuff almost. People don't talk about it. They just turn up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, we need to have a big discussion. It's bad within training and behavior, but it's a crisis point, I think, in veterinary, and people are leaving the profession. People are going on long-term sick, and sadly, some people are taking their lives.
That's it.
It's a very serious time.
Yeah, that's awful. I was just astounded that there were so many of them. And like us as pet pros, animal pros, there's just so many of them. We're all experiencing the same thing. And this lady was reaching out for support. So I'm just so glad that she found me. I was recommended to her by someone that I don't even know. So she's obviously seen what I'm doing on social medias and what I'm putting out. She's recommended me to this vet physio. And yeah, I'm just pleased that she's reached out, because I'm going to do some stuff with them. I've referred them on to yourself as well, because I think you could do some work with them. And I'm just so pleased that she's reached out and they're acknowledging that they need support, and there is help and support for. And I think we need to have these spaces like you and I offer to help them, you know?
Well, this is important, despite us looking at all the negatives there. I've worked with many practices. I'm going up to Cambridge Vet School in February as part of the Wellbeing Week, talking to the kind of new vets coming in.
Oh, wow.
The thing is about having conversations. part of the problem is people feel they're alone in feeling it, and they're not. And, we have to look at where we can influence. When we think about the circles of influence, which are very important to keep reminding as part of a healthy mindset, the things that we can control, things that we can influence, and the things we can't control. The thing that we control definitely is our own well-being and our own self-care, and doing the work and understanding things, and making sure we're doing whatever we can for our own emotional protection and well-being, because we must empower ourselves to do that. We have to recognize we have that within our power. The things we can influence, especially within vet practices, the culture within that vet practice can be influenced. Little things can go a long way, having these kind of discussions. Things that are out of our control are the bigger picture stuff. But again, as a collective, we have more of an influence over the bigger picture stuff, like governing bodies and regulators and whatever else, because as individuals, it's hard. But we can do a lot within vet practices. I've worked with a lot of individual vet practices, and it's great to see that culture shift over 6 to 12 months. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's just empowering people. But starting the conversations are important. That's why these kind of conversations are important.
Yes, brilliant. Andy, I could literally talk and listen to you all day, but we're going to start wrapping up this episode with some final questions and thoughts. So, as we wrap up, if there's one thing you'd want pet professionals, vet pros, animal care professionals listening to take away from today's conversation, especially those who might be quietly struggling or feeling emotionally worn down, what would you want them to hear or to give themselves permission to do, please?
It comes down to self-care. It's giving ourselves permission to understand that putting self-care as the priority is being selfish. It's not being all these kind of other words that we do. That's actually really important, because we can't do for other people. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but this thing about put your own mask on before you put somebody else's on, they talk about that on the airplane.
Yes.
We have to do that. We have to understand that. And asking for help and reaching out is a strength. It is not a weakness. People who crumble and have burnout aren't weak. They are the strong people who are carrying the burden until they break, because of a narrative in their mind that thinks that somehow they are weak if they ask for help. Being vulnerable is a strength. Feeling vulnerable is the problem. So I think reaching out is very important, and also to get people to understand the importance of investing not only time, but some of their own money as well into that self-care. If you're a dog trainer and you spend more on hot dog sausages for your dog training than you do on self-care, there is a problem. And the thing is, having a good mentor, having a coach. I have a therapist that I see every probably 2 or 3 weeks. I have done for years and years, and she's not a dog trainer, but she could be very easily, because all I ever do is talk about dogs and stuff that we have. That's tax deductible, so I can claim it on my tax, and it's my self-care. That's my point where I can just talk about anything, offload, and we need to have that. It's very important. We don't have to do this on our own. That's the biggest problem, I think. A lot of people, soldier on, rather than have healthy boundaries, they put up barriers, and they just plod along, and they go through those big ups and downs, peaks and troughs, booms and busts. They don't have to. Having wonderful spaces like you operate, reaching out to wherever feels right. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, and you. Brilliant. I think if people can reach out to you as well. So for those that are listening, or our viewers that might be watching at some point, if anyone wants to find out more about you and your work, how can they reach you, please?
It's simple. Go to www.dogcc.org. That shows my dog-centered stuff, but also you'll find Safe Space on there as well.
Brilliant. And I will put all the details in the show notes as well. Andy, thank you so much for joining me on the Pet Business Wellbeing Podcast today. I've loved chatting to you.
Well, thanks, Nathan. See you again soon.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Pet Business Wellbeing Podcast. If you enjoyed today's chat, I'd love if you could share this with a friend. Subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And please consider leaving me a review, as it really helps me to reach more pet professionals who need this kind of support. Until next time, take care of yourself, look after your well-being, and remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about building a business you actually enjoy being in. Bye for now.